This video is brought to you by Teepublic. Right now, you can get my new shirt promoting this retrospective series. Also, Amazon Music Unlimited. Download the app to have access to your favorite songs and podcasts. And the best part, no ads. Get your first month for free. Links in the description. When we last left off, we talked about how many of the Hanna-Barbera action cartoons that aired on Saturday mornings came under fire from parent watch groups, like the now defunct Action for Children's Television, pressuring networks to get rid of programming that may promote and incite violence in the real world. Which, funny enough, in the late 1960s, America was continuing to fight in the Vietnam War, serial killers were on the loose, and assassinations from presidential and civil rights figures were all too common. On top of that, many riots and protests were made in response to the injustice by the US government and racial violence. This might sound familiar. Because of this, all these shows were canceled by 1968 and were replaced by comedic lighter fare. The big three networks, CBS in particular, were scrambling for the next big hit, a show that wasn't so violent, and that could be a mix of an adventure series like Johnny Quest and a comedic slapstick of one of Hanna-Barbera's funny animal cartoons. Luckily, help would arrive in the form of 4 teenagers and their meddling dog.
Yogi Bear is smarter than the average bear. Yogi Bear is always in the ranger's hair. The biggest show in town is Huckleberry Hound for all you guys and gals. Scooby Doo, looking for you. Scooby Doo, where are ya? Everything's Archie.
The Archie Show, produced by rival Filmation, made its debut on September 14th, 1968 on CBS. The series was, of course, based on Bob Montana's long-running comic series Archie, and features the misadventures of Archie Andrews and his teen pals, Betty, Veronica, Jughead, and Reggie. Oh, and to all you young viewers out there, the CW series Riverdale was based on these comics.
I'm so over the toxic masculinity in this hallway right now.
Yeah. But the show's claim to fame was arguably spawning the chart-topping hit, Sugar Sugar.
Honey, honey.
The Archie Show caught the attention of the late Fred Silverman, the head executive in charge of children's animation on CBS, who was looking to capitalize on its success. He contacted William Hanna and Joseph Barbera about possibly developing another show just like it, and worked with them closely on the process. He wanted the show to be in the same vein as the 40s radio drama I Love a Mystery. Barbera would assign the task along to 2 storymen, the late Joe Ruby, a former Disney in-betweener, and Ken Spears, a friend of William Hanna's son. Ruby and Spears met in the editing department of Hanna-Barbera, and would both be moved up to writers, where they wrote scripts for the original Space Ghost. Also joining their team was animation legend Iwao Takamoto, a former Disney animator, who designed the main cast. The new show will be about the adventures of a teenage rock group called the Mysteries 5, not unlike the Archie Show. However, there's a twist. Each week, the kids would solve mysteries involving ghosts, monsters, werewolves, and other supernatural beings, where they were performing at gigs. The cast included 5 teens: Jeff, Mike, Kelly, Linda, and Linda's brother WW, along with their dog Too Much, who played the bongos.
And then Joe said, Freddie likes dogs. Let's see if we can put a dog in it too.
For Too Much, a big cowardly dog was chosen over a small feisty dog. However, the choices for the big dog were between a Great Dane and a sheepdog. The Great Dane would eventually be picked, but this raised concern that it'll be too much like the comic strip character Marmaduke. But Barbera assured Ruby and Spears it wouldn't be a problem. When designing Too Much, Takamoto was consulted by a studio employee, who was a breeder of Great Danes. After learning what made prize-winning Great Dane, Iwao broke all the rules
And I selected about 5 things, I think, and went in the opposite direction. For instance, a good, strong, straight back. So I sloped his back. A strong chin. So I underswung his chin. I lifted the eyes so that they became sort of human structured eyes, and very heavy brows, so the animators can use them to emphasize certain expressions. And I think a straight hind legs, I think she mentioned, so I bowed them. And I thought I could get a very funny duck waddle when he walked.
Joe and Ken typed up a presentation for the show for Fred, but unfortunately, he wasn't impressed.
And Fred says, don't like the dog, and get rid of the band.
And Fred hated the title. Hated the title Mysteries 5. And it was like you just saw that all this enthusiasm for the show was going right down the drain because you didn't have a title. And then finally Fred says, you know, we talked about doing a show with Bob Denver, and it was going to be called Who's Scared. We all went, great idea, Fred. That's a terrific title. And so it became Who's Scared.
During the reworking of the show, the main cast were given new names and personalities. The 5 teenagers were reduced to 4 and are now known as Ronnie, who later became Fred, suggested by Silverman himself. Kelly became Daphne, Linda became Velma, and WW became Shaggy. The teens were now based on the characters from the 60s series, The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. Dobie, Thalia, Zelda, and Maynard G. Krebs. By the way, if Maynard looks familiar to you, then that's because he's played by none other than our favorite castaway, Bob Gilligan Denver. In addition, the more scarier elements of the show were toned down to focus more on the comedy from Shaggy and Too Much. With this new pitch, the title had to be changed as well. When it was time to pitch the show to CBS for the fall season, there was a bit of a problem.
When I went to present the idea to the top management of CBS, along with the whole fall schedule, and bear in mind that this program, Who's Scared, was the centerpiece of the whole show, and that without it, we really had no schedule. And I went up there, and Frank Stanton, who was president then, a very somber man, said, "That's too violent. We can't put that on the air."
They were scared to death. They went, we can't put this on the air. It's too frightening for these kids. Every parent in America was going to call in and say, why are you giving my kid nightmares?
So with that, Silverman had Joe and Ken tone down the show, and the comedy, as well as Too Much, were given center stage. In addition, the teenage rock group element was dropped. On a flight to a development meeting, Fred was inspired by a vocal scat line in Frank Sinatra's song Strangers in the Night, and decided to rename the dog Scooby Doo. When the show, now titled Scooby Doo, Where Are You?, was represented to the executives, it was approved, and the rest, as they say, was history.
Mystery fans, hold on to your ghosts, cause here come the spookiest, most spine-tingling tales ever to chill a bone. Watch Scooby Doo, Where Are You?
Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Will make its debut on CBS Saturday morning, September 13th, 1969, following the perils of Penelope Pitstop. Originally, there were concerns that the show would be beaten out by ABC's The Hardy Boys, another mystery-solving show, but this one based on an established book series. But the show became a surprise hit. 65% of the Saturday morning audience, i.e. kids, were tuned in every week to see Scooby, Shaggy, Fred, Daphne, and Velma drive around in a mystery machine, solving capers involving supernatural forces, but end up being crooks in masks, who spout the famous line,
"Yes, might have gotten away with it too. If it wasn't for these blasted kids and their dogs."
The cast of Scooby-Doo featured 5 characters. Fred, the stalwart leader, who was voiced by young actor Frank Welker in his first voiceover role that would lead to a successful career, and is still voicing the character to this day.
I wanted to do Shaggy because that was the funny part. And Casey Kasem, who was doing Shaggy, he wanted to do Freddy because it was more of a serious acting part. We ended up getting the exact opposite parts. I ended up with Freddy, he ended up with Shaggy, which he was fantastic at. How I came up with that voice was basically, it's my own voice with maybe 5 cups of coffee. Hey, would you do it for a Scooby snack? Oh gosh, well come on guys. Hey, I can drive because I have a license.
Velma, the brainy analyst, was voiced by actress Nicole Jaffe, who starred in the Elvis Presley film The Trouble with Girls with Frank. Daphne, the danger-prone beauty, was originally voiced by actress and singer Andrea Stefaniana Christofferson. Kristofferson left the show after the first season to get married and move to New York. She was replaced by actress Heather North, who resumed the role until 1985 and briefly returned in 2003 along with Jaffe. Famed disc jockey and American Top 40 host Casey Kasem provided the voice of the oafish, hungry slacker Shaggy.
Well, when I auditioned for Shaggy, I knew they wanted a hippie, and I wasn't too good at doing a hippie, but they kept calling me back, and they called me back a third time and said I had the part.
And the show's main star, the always hungry, always scared Scooby Doo, was voiced by voice acting legend Don Messick, using a similar voice he used for Astro from the Jetsons.
Roll, Roy! Right, Rogy Rouse!
Scooby was said to be one of Don Messick's favorite roles, and you could definitely see why. He really does give life to this talking dog.
Do I get a Scooby snack?
We'll look for one after we're off the camera here.
Okay. Scooby-Dooby Doo.
Hanna-Barbera and CBS knew they had a hit on their hands, and the ratings were through the roof. According to Iwo Takamoto,
none of us had any indication this was going to happen. All we knew is that our ratings numbers were tremendous. If we ever drop below a 50 or 60 share, Fred Silverman would have a fit. That's how successful the show was.
Scooby-Doo Are You concluded its run on 25 episodes on October 31st, 1970, with the episode Don't Fool with the Phantom. But this was far from the end. 2 years later, a follow-up series, the new Scooby-Doo movies, will premiere on CBS. These hour-long episodes feature the gang-solving mysteries with various guest stars, such as the Harlem Globetrotters, Sonny and Cher, Mama Cass, Three Stooges, Batman and Robin, etc. This version of the show lasted until 1974, and the network will continue to air reruns of the original series. In 1975, Fred Silverman would become the president of ABC, and decided to give Scooby and the gang a new home.
When I moved to ABC, I guess the people at CBS didn't recognize how important Scooby was to the schedule because they let the option expire. I just jumped on it. I said, buy it.
Scooby will remain on ABC for the rest of his original Saturday morning run. Some episodes will introduce new characters, like Scooby's family members, such as Scooby Dumb and a more controversial Scrappy Doo.
I've heard more pros and cons on Scrappy. Some people love him, and others wonder why.
1985's 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo saw the gang team up with a warlock character based upon and voiced by horror legend Vincent Price to catch real supernatural creatures. But the results were disappointing. ABC canceled the show, ironically after 13 episodes, and Scooby wasn't seen on the network for the next 2 years, until 1988, with the spin-off A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, a more Looney Tunes / Tex Avery take on a babyfication trend going on at the time. Pup ended in 1991, and in the early 90s, Scooby-Doo had a very quiet hiatus, with reruns being shown on the USA Cartoon Express. However, all that changed in 1995 when the show moved to the then still new cable channel Cartoon Network. The reruns attracted a new generation of fans and became Cartoon Network's top-rated show in 1997 and 1998. Scooby would later find its way to other Turner stations while promotions and merchandise grew. 1998 saw the release of Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. Originally meant for theaters, this darker take of the original series was a huge success on home video, at a time when Disney flooded the market with their cheap direct-to-video sequels. The success of Zombie Island would lead to more direct-to-video movies, as well as Scoob's return to Saturday morning, for the first time in 17 years. What's New Scooby-Doo, a more 21st century take on a classic gang, this would lead to more series, with the most recent being 2019's Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, along with several live-action films, video games, toys, and more. 2020 saw the release of Scoob, a feature-length CGI animated film following the origin story of Scooby and the gang. The film was meant to launch a shared Hanna-Barbera universe, which is now up in the air. I plan on going more into detail on this film in part 5, so I'll stop here. Today, Scooby-Doo has become one of the most popular and iconic cartoon characters of all time, and the only Hanna-Barbera property to survive after the studio and its founders met their end. With the many incarnations and tons of parodies and references, it cemented itself into pop culture.
It's Old Man Withers, the guy who runs the haunted amusement park. And I would have got away with it, too, if it hadn't been for you snooping kids.
While many have criticized the show for being formulaic, others have praised its lovable characters, creepy and fun imagery, and innocent charm. The staying power of this franchise and its ability to adapt with the times is also very admirable. I've always been a huge fan, and it's been part of my life ever since I was a kid. I loved it back then, I love it now, and I hope to see more of Scooby-Doo and those meddling kids in the future.
Scooby-Dooby Doo!
The success of Scooby-Doo led to Hanna-Barbera itself shamelessly capitalizing on it throughout the 70s. Many of these shows feature teenage detectives solving mysteries, usually with a pet or a mascot. 1970s Josie and the Pussycats, based loosely on the Archie comic series, featured abandoned spy and mystery capers, usually involving mad scientists. 1971's Funky Phantom featured 3 teens and a Revolutionary War-era ghost solving crimes. 1973's Speed Buggy featured 3 teens in a talking car, while 1976's Jabberjaw featured 4 teens in a talking shark, who sounds like Curly from the Three Stooges, as a rock band, foiling the plans of villains and evil scientists, which is made at the height of the Jaws craze.
Scooby-Doo changed the rules for Saturday morning. Once that was established as a hit, that was the model and that was the template, and an awful lot of shows started out with someone saying, okay, instead of 4 kids and a dog solving mysteries, let's have 3 kids and a cat, or let's have 4 kids and a duck.
These shows weren't perfect, but some of them, like Josie and Jabberjaw, certainly were entertaining. But others like Clue Club and Goober and the Ghost Chasers and Butch Cassidy, man, they weren't even trying. But not every cartoon Hanna-Barbera made in the 70s was a Scooby-Doo knockoff. Other shows during this period were Inch High Private Eye, C-Lab 2020, The Harlem Globetrotters, Dynamite Dog Wonder, The Roman Holidays, and Hong Kong Phooey. The latter a parody of the kung fu martial arts craze at the time, and starring black actor and musician Scatman Crothers.
We were doing a show called Hong Kong Phooey, and we were casting voices. We had to cast Hong Kong Phooey. So I brought in, let's say, an actor, and I had a script, and I did it with him. Then I brought in 4 other actors and did the same lines with 4 other actors. Then I brought in ABC, and they sat there, and I would hit the machine and play the 5 voices. And every time the 4th voice got the big laugh. So we finally picked it. I didn't tell him who it was. It was a black man called Scatman Crothers. If you ever remember this man. He had a real sing-songy kind of a delivery. Well, who died, I believe it, who died? Who called in the ambulance, he'd say instead of ambulance, you know. So they loved it, and they swore, but I never told them who it was until after they said, this is the one we want. Because if I had told them before we did the voices that this was the voice of a 71-year-old black man, they would have turned it down. They would have an opinion on it before they ever got to it.
HB would also make shows based on licensed properties, as well as attempting to get back into prime time with the less successful Where's Huddles and Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, which was inspired by All in the Family and spun off from a segment in the anthology series Love American Style. Unfortunately, most shows ended up being affected from meddling from watch groups, like Action for Children's Television. Many of the violence and slapstick were toned down, and some were forced to discuss social issues, most infamously the 1973 series Yogi's Gang, which featured the titular character and many classic HB regulars traveling the world in an ark, confronting villains with not-so-subtle names like Mr. Bigot, the Envy Brothers, the Gossipy Witch of the West, and I Am Sloppy. Hanna-Barbera were even able to bring Bill and Joe's Tom and Jerry to Saturday mornings in an all-new revival. But because of television regulations, the cartoon violence the shorts were known for was not allowed. Instead, the 2 were non-violent friends who just kind of did stuff, resulting in a pretty boring show.
The way they rationalize, they say anything that can be imitated by a child we don't want to see. Therefore, you don't even throw pies in anybody's faces anymore. But you know, I'll never forget going to one of the pressure committees and saying, and I said, well, you know, I was raised on this kind of stuff. I was raised on this comedy, and it never hurt me. And they said, oh, yes, but look at the world today, they said. We've been sanitizing our stuff for years, but I don't see the world getting any better. I mean, I don't see I don't see the children getting sanitized in any way. Children do what they want, but it isn't the cartoons that do it. What I hate to see is that I can't make them laugh the way I used to make them laugh.
But Hanna-Barbera's other big hit during the decade was the Superfriends, which featured characters from DC Comics' Justice League of America, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, as well as new characters Hanna-Barbera created for the show, Wendy, Marvin, and Wonder Dog, who were based from, well, take a wild guess. Interesting enough, this wasn't the first time the comic book characters made their way to Saturday mornings. Some of them appeared in shows created by rival Filmation, not to mention Batman and Robin appearing twice in the new Scooby Doo movies, and Superman and Wonder Woman appearing in an episode of The Brady Kids. It was the 70s, don't question it. Airing for 16 episodes, the show was canceled in 1974, but the boom of primetime superhero shows like Wonder Woman and The $6 Million Man caused ABC to reconsider. In other words,
shit, we gonna make some money with this.
As a result, reruns of the first season were re-aired as a mid-season replacement, and was so popular it was revived under several different titles the next few years, and introduced more and more DC Comics characters like Flash, Plastic Man, and Green Arrow, while also introducing new superheroes Hanna-Barbera created, like El Dorado, Apache Chief, Black Vulcan,
and Super Hulk,
and most famously, the Wonder Twins.
It was really important, I think, to get some diversity into the look of who you were seeing on television at the time.
It's not so much that there wasn't ethnicity on Saturday morning animation, but it was sort of weirdly regimented. If you wanted to find black guys, you had to go look at Fat Albert. You had to go look at the Harlem Globetrotters, but you couldn't find any white guys there.
I mean, you can't go through the 60s with the civil rights movement and the counterculture and all that and not be affected.
The networks had come to the realization that they were serving a diverse population.
And let's not forget,
meanwhile, at the Legion of Doom.
Not now!
Okay.
The show was a huge hit, becoming one of the top-rated programs on Saturday mornings. Kids loved it, reminding them of the campy fun of the Adam West Batman series, and the writers and story editors at Hanna-Barbera enjoyed working on it. However, the editors of DC Comics were less than pleased with the show, as Iwo Takamoto recalled,
I never got so many irate letters about anything as those that came from the comic book staff regarding how we were handling the characters. There was a high degree of sarcasm to them, an underlying viciousness that sometimes got to the point of being X-rated. These people did not simply promote the comic book world, they lived in it. Periodically, I would gather these vindictive missives up and take them into the show writers and show them to them. The reply I usually got from them was no less blunt than the letters. Tell them to go fuck themselves, they'd say. Today, of course, they could tell them that personally, since we are now a sister company of DC within the Warner Brothers corporate structure.
Today, with the rise of much more well-received adaptations of DC Comics characters, the Super Friends has become a bit old hat, but is fondly remembered by those who grew up with it. The 70s belonged to Hanna-Barbera. They dominated Saturday mornings, with many of their shows becoming hits on the big three networks. And they had very few competitors. Sure, there was the Patty Freeling and many TV specials, but their most notable rival during this period was Filmation, founded by Norm Prescott, Lou Scheimer, and Hal Sutherland in 1962. The studio had a few big hits under its belt, most notably Star Trek the Animated Series in 1973, which won the company an Emmy. They would lose their Saturday morning airtime on ABC to Hanna-Barbera after the failure of the short-lived Uncle Croc's block, hosted by Charles Nelson Riley. Though this wouldn't be the last we hear of Filmation in this video. Speaking of rivals, let's get back to Joe Ruby and Ken Spears. After the success of Scooby Doo, Where Are You?, Joe and Ken would briefly leave Hanna-Barbera to become writers and producers at the Patty Freeling, working on shows such as The Barkleys, The Houndcats, and Planet of the Apes, the animated series. They would briefly return to HB to become supervisors of many of the later Scooby-Doo episodes that aired on ABC. And speaking of ABC, Fred Silverman wanted to create competition to Hanna-Barbera, when he became concerned they were putting quantity over quality. So with the financial backing from ABC, Joe and Ken set up Ruby and Spears Enterprises as a subsidiary of Filmways. Their first show was a Scooby-Doo ripoff with a twist, 1978's Fang Face. Throughout the 80s and 90s, they would create many shows on Saturday mornings, some with big hits, like Thundarr the Barbarian, others existed. Also, Andy Hayward, the son of Hanna-Barbera Vice President Louis M. Hayward, would start out as an assistant to Joe Barbera, working on shows such as Scooby's All-Star Laugh-Olympics. He would leave to start a little company called Deke. With tons and tons of new shows on the horizon, meant a heavier workload, and demand was more than the LA studio could handle. So they needed outside help. William Hanna would set up Hanna-Barbera Australia. Their first show was The Funky Phantom, as well as later episodes of the new Scooby Doo movies. It was later reorganized as Southern Star / Hanna-Barbera Australia, and produced many CBS children's shows of the 80s, and in 1988 would be sold to Disney to become, you know them, you love them, Walt Disney Animation Australia. HB would get production services from more outside studios, such as Taiwanese Wang Film Productions, Phil Cartoons in the Philippines, and Japanese studio Mook Animation. But let's not forget one of Hanna-Barbera's biggest achievements during the decade, the 1973 animated theatrical film Charlotte's Web, based upon a book by E.B. White, directed by Charles A. Nichols and Ibu Takamoto, and written by the Walden's creator Earl Hammond Jr. The story, as many of you know already, features a pig named Wilbur, who befriends a literate spider named Charlotte, who advises a plan to keep him from being slaughtered by writing messages praising the young pig. There were several attempts to bring in a classic story to the big screen. One of the earliest was from the late Gene Deitch, the Czech animator whose early 60s Tom and Jerry shorts were discussed in part 1.
This fellow had done some artwork, and it was the most gruesome, ugly artwork I've ever seen in my life. So he came into us and showed us the artwork. I wanted to know if we were interested in doing it. So we got involved with Edgar Bronfman, the head of Seagram's, worth over $400 million a day, you know. And we got involved to do this. It's a lovely story. And we cast it well, got a nice style of artwork.
The Sherman brothers, who had just won Oscars for their work on Disney's Mary Poppins, were hired to write the songs, and Joe Barbera hired well-known character actors for voice talent, in addition to regulars Don Messick and John Stevenson. These include Henry Gibson as Wilbur, Rex Allen as the narrator, Agnes Moorehead as a goose, and the late Debbie Reynolds as Charlotte, which would become one of her most famous roles. Originally, Tony Randall was hired to play Templeton, the rat, but the directors felt he didn't quite have the raunchiness needed for the character, so he was replaced by comedian Paul Lynde. Lynde was no stranger to Hanna-Barbera, as he previously voiced the characters Mildew Wolf, Claude Pertwee, and the Hooded Claw. Charlotte's Web made its premiere at Radio City Music Hall on February 22, 1973, and was released to theaters the following March. The film came out at a very interesting time for theatrical animation, a time when Disney, the king of animated features, were releasing less than memorable films without the leadership of Walt, who died 7 years before, and cartoonist Ralph Bakshi was making a name for himself in adult animation, starting with Fritz the Cat, the first X-rated animated film. On top of that, Paramount Pictures, who haven't released an animated film since Mr. Bug Goes to Town, had no idea how to market the film. To Ibu Takamoto's surprise, the film would receive positive reviews from critics, including a glowing review from Time magazine. William Hanna would also cite the film as one of his personal favorites. However, not everyone was a fan. Some criticized the film for its animation and the music, but the biggest critic of all would turn out to be the author of the original book, E.B. White. Despite consulting which parts of the story were to be kept in, he would write in a 1977 letter, "We have never ceased to regret that your version of Charlotte's Web never got made. The Hanna-Barbera version has never pleased either of us. A travesty." The movie did moderate business at the box office, but constant TV airings and VHS releases would make the film a cult classic, spawning a direct-to-video sequel and a live-action remake in 2006, which in recent years has become more well-known than a Hanna-Barbera film. Paramount and Hanna-Barbera would team up to create another animated film 9 years later with Heidi's Song, based on the children's fairy tale. Also during the 70s, Hanna-Barbera began experimenting with live-action films and specials. These include the infamous Kiss Meets the Phantom at the Park, the after-school special The Runaways, the feature film Chomps, and the Emmy-winning The Gathering. The latter featured Ed Asner as a man dying of cancer, trying to reconcile with his family for the holidays. This special struck a chord with Joe Barbera, as it reminded him of his own absent father. The only difference, according to Joe, the father of our story seeks reunion and reconciliation, whereas my old man simply made himself disappear. HB would also delve into variety shows, a popular staple of television at the time, with the Hanna-Barbera Happy Hour. By the end of the 70s, Hanna-Barbera became the largest producer of cartoons in the industry, but as the 80s was slowly approaching, all that was about to change.
We'll return after these messages.
Hey everyone, just so you know, I'm helping promote the documentary Faking Filmation, created by animator and He-Man superfan James Eatock. It features his journey of creating an unofficial episode of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, as well as getting hounded by NBC Universal, the franchise's owners. The documentary also takes a dive into the history of television animation. Currently, the Kickstarter is completed, but if you want to see the whole documentary, you can still contribute to the Indiegogo in the link below. By the time of this video's release, Kevin Smith's reboot will already be released, and if you are hungry for more He-Man, James has got you covered. Check it out and enjoy.
Now back to the show. Do you see how your patience paid off?
From somewhere. Masked Crusaders.
The 80s saw a rise of first-run syndicated cartoons. While cartoons were originally meant for the weekend, these shows would air weekdays as children were coming home from school. Thanks to the Action for Children's Television and the FCC, studios like Marvel, Sunbow, Reagan Bass, and Deke were all releasing animated shows based on licensed properties and popular toy lines. But perhaps the most famous show of this period that kickstarted the trend was He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, the flagship show of Filmation, and based on the Mattel toy line. On top of that, Disney, who had previously refused to venture into television animation due to the low quality, were now dipping their toes in the syndicated and Saturday morning cartoons with substantial budgets, due to the push of then CEO Michael Eisner. Starting off with shows like Wuzzles and The Adventures of the Gummy Bears, and exploding into popularity with DuckTales and mini shows that would make up the Disney afternoon. Hanna-Barbera, no longer the kings of children's television animation like before, were attempting to stay afloat in the changing industry, with their control over children's programming going down from 80% to 20%. The studio continued to make more shows based on their most popular franchises and release their own cartoons based on celebrities and licensed properties, but none of them really took off. Unless you count Smurfs, based on a classic successful Belgian comic by artist Peyo. It was about a society of tiny blue creatures led by Papa Smurf, who lived in a Smurf village, and constantly under the threat of evil wizard Gargamel and his cat Azrael, whose plans always fail. In the late 70s, Stuart R. Ross will make an agreement with Peyo to market some Smurfs merchandise in the US, to a huge success. So much so that Melissa Silverman, daughter of then president of NBC, Fred Silverman, had a Smurfette doll which caught the attention of her father, who thought it would be a good addition to the Saturday morning schedule, which at the time was going to be canceled. And with that, he contacted Hanna-Barbera to commission the series. Vice President of Children's Programming at Hanna-Barbera, Margaret Loesch, was one of the developers of the series, and she recalls,
Fred Silverman, then president of NBC, called and said, "There's this property called the Smurfs. We'd never heard of it." I sent one of my associates down the street, and he found Smurf keychains and toys and dumped them out on the conference table in Joe Barbera's office. Joe looked at them and said, "All these little blue bastards look the same." I said, "Aren't they cute?" He said, "It's your show." So I worked with Peyo. I go to Brussels with my team, and he would come here. While we were developing it, our producer Gerard Baldwin was making a little sales clip for the merchandising people and for the affiliates meetings. When Fred, who loved the show, saw the clip, he said, "We've got to change the music and add a laugh track." But we didn't change the music or add a laugh track. To this day, young people come up to me and say, "I love the Smurfs and I love the music." I've also had people say to me, I'm so happy I didn't have canned laughter.
Margaret would have a prominent career after leaving Hanna-Barbera. In 1984, she became president and CEO of Marvel Productions, and afterwards, she would run Fox Kids from 1990 to 1997, where she was responsible for buying and greenlighting X-Men and Power Rangers, both becoming monster hits. In the 2020s, she was the CEO and president of the now-defunct The Hub Network. Despite this, selling the show was not easy.
And had a lot of battles because one of the NBC people wanted to make them all different colors. They were trying to change it, and I fought it and fought it. And I didn't think a half hour would do it, an hour should do it. And I had to go to New York and argue why it should be an hour instead of a half hour.
The Smurfs made its debut on September 12, 1981, and the show not only became a hit, it became a phenomenon. The Smurfs became pop culture icons at the time, with merchandise through the roof, where it definitely became the SpongeBob of its day. And much like Scooby Doo, the success spawned several shows that were similar in concept. In addition to several primetime TV specials, the show won 2 Emmy Awards and became one of the longest-running Saturday morning cartoons in history, ending in 1990 with a total of 256 episodes. Today, the Smurfs have made a bit of a comeback thanks to the live-action Sony films of the 2010s, plus an all-CGI reboot, as well as a new Nickelodeon show on the way. As stated before, Hanna-Barbera's other shows during this period came and went, but also several legends from the golden age of animation were now working at HB, such as Tex Avery and Friz Freleng. Tex, who at the time was mostly doing commercial work, was Bill Hanna's mentor at MGM, and Hanna was more than happy to help out an old friend. He developed the short-lived The Quickie Koala Show in 1980, which would, unfortunately, be the last thing he worked on before dying of cancer that same year. Freleng was a consultant of Pink Panther and Sons, one of the many shows capitalizing on the Muppet Babies. Later shows would include the Flintstone Kids and a pup named Scooby Doo. Meanwhile, financially struggling Taft Broadcasting, owner of Hanna-Barbera, was folded into Great American Broadcasting, while Joe was busy pitching and selling ideas, one of which was animated Bible tales called Greatest Adventures. This wouldn't be for television, but for the brand new direct-to-video market. The series became a success on home video, despite rejection and skepticism Joe initially faced from backers. In 1989, animator Tom Ruegger, who was a producer of Pup Named Scooby-Doo, was given a call to help resurrect Warner Brothers' animation department.
At that time, my ex-boss from Hanna-Barbera, Jean McCurdy, was the executive in charge over there at Warner Brothers Animation. She came to me one afternoon in January 1989 and said, "Hey, Steven Spielberg wants to make a cartoon series over here at Warner Brothers. It's called Tiny Toons. The spelling would be changed later. And other than that, we really don't know much about it, except that it will probably feature junior versions of Bugs and Daffy. Would you want to come over and produce it?" I said never. No, I immediately said yes. That was a Monday. On Tuesday, I went into Hanna-Barbera. I went to Bill and Joe separately and said, "There's an opportunity to make a show with Spielberg." And they were great and supportive. I was under contract, so they could have said no. But they let me out of my contract, and I was gone that day.
Tom and many of HB's staff would move to Warner Brothers to develop hip animated programs, such as Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, and Freakazoid. Also that same year, TNT aired a Yabba Dabba Doo celebration, 50 Years of Hanna-Barbera, a star-studded special hosted by Tony Danza and Annie Potts, a look back of the past 50 years of William Hanna and Joseph Barbera's partnership into animation. Great America's takeover would mean many changes to the studio. The much older Bill and Joe would still be heads of the company, but would have to take orders from others. And Joe wasn't exactly thrilled about it either. The takeover would bring in a new leader. Enter David Kirschner. David started out as an illustrator for Jim Henson, which led in creating the popular children's book series Rose Petal Place. Though his biggest contribution to film would be creating and executive producing the Spielberg-Don Bluth collab An American Tail and the horror franchise Child's Play. David had big plans for the studio by reintroducing successful classic characters to new audiences and making the studio attractive to buyers. In his first year, he had gotten more shows on the air than what the studio had done 5 years prior.
Our goal is to show the industry that we are a player. It's time to get in there and show what we can do. Disney has done it, and we are following in their footsteps.
Kirschner and Hanna-Barbera also planned many feature films for the studio. Some, like a live-action Scooby Doo film to be made by Universal, went through development hell, a live-action Curious George movie, and a Sally Field vehicle, a police psychological drama, Conundrum, that never got off the ground. In addition to opening the family film division, Bedrock Production, which produced a TV special, Dreamer of Oz, and the infamous failed TV pilot, Pujinski.
What are you gonna do now? Well, first I'm gonna try licking myself, and then I'm gonna catch my killer.
What the fuck? David also created some of these shows, like Wake, Rattle, and Roll, Rick Moranis and Gravedale High, and the cult classic Pirates of Dark Water, debuting on ABC in 1991. The show featured a young prince and his gang of misfits trying to find the lost 13 treasures of Rule before the evil pirate Bloff gets to it first. The show is very entertaining, and I definitely recommend checking it out. David also tried to get the studio back into prime time due to the runaway success of The Simpsons, but the results were disappointing, with noble efforts like CBS's Fist Police and ABC's Capital Critters being quickly canceled. Bill Hanna enjoyed working with David and was more than happy to help out, lending his voice as a narrator for the TV special The Last Halloween and directing the Flintstone special I Yabba Dabba Doo. Joe, however, wasn't quite as happy with giving up creative control, as he and David butted heads over direction of the company, and he wasn't fond of most of David's ideas, except for a few like Tom and Jerry Kids. 1990 would be a big year for Hanna-Barbera. Universal would briefly own the rights to the library and develop a simulator ride at their then new theme park, Universal Studios Florida.
You're not gonna believe where I've just been. Universal Studios Florida, where they have Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera ride. Well, that's a chase. It's not a chase that you watch, but you're in it. And there's only one place you'll find it, in Orlando. The Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera at Universal Studios Florida.
One of the park's original attractions, and was the only one to run smoothly on opening day, and I was fortunate enough to ride it the last year it opened. It would later be replaced by a similar Nickelodeon attraction, Jimmy Neutron's Nicktoon Blast, which in turn would be replaced by Despicable Me ride. There was also the theatrical Jetsons the Movie, which was in production before Kirschner took over. Notable for being the last project of Mel Blanc and George O'Hanlon, who died during recording, the movie was a critical and financial failure, and ended up grossing just $20.3 million in the US. One notable controversy was the casting of pop star Tiffany in the role of Judy Jetson, which greatly upset the cast and crew, and especially Judy's original actress, the late Janet Waldo.
I was totally crushed. I originated the character, and I feel very sentimental about Judy. If they had recast the whole show, there wouldn't have been any problem at all. But the fact that my part was the only one that was changed just threw me. I felt it was very disloyal of Hanna and Barbera. I don't like to badmouth Hanna-Barbera because they've been very good to me, and I've been told that this is just a one-shot thing. But this Judy incident just hurt my feelings.
In 1991, Great America would soon find a buyer, which was none other than media mogul Ted Turner. Turner, who had success in creating news network CNN and cable channels such as TBS and TNT, had acquired the rights to the MGM animation library, the pre-1948 Looney Tunes / Merry Melody shorts, and the Fleischer / Famous Studios era Popeye shorts. He was also no stranger to television animation, as he created the campy environmentalist superhero series Captain Planet and the Planeteers. Ted's company, Turner Entertainment, would buy the entire Hanna-Barbera and Ruby Spears library for $320 million, outbidding Hallmark Cards and MCA, parent company of Universal Studios.
We are pleased to be one step closer to obtaining the world's finest animation library. The Hanna-Barbera acquisition is in keeping with Turner Broadcasting's continuing efforts to bring our viewers the highest quality entertainment programming.
With all these animated properties in his possession, Turner had big plans. He wanted to create a cable channel that showed cartoons 24 hours a day. It could work. If you want to support this series and many other videos, click the link below to my Patreon. You get a special credit, early access, shout out to your channel or blog, even a cartoon character commissioned by me. And also don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I thank you, and I gotta fly.
Now we're here to help, so listen up, yo. This is how it's done in home video. Those creative types call this a job. Check out those heads that say start to bar. Now over here's something to catch your eye. It's pretty cool, but that's no surprise. Amazing product that's on your shelves. What do you think? This stuff was made by elves?
We do it all for you. We do it all for you. We do it all for you. We do it all for you.
We like to...
Don't miss it!